The big guns boomed out with an earth-shattering roar, and their deadly cargo screamed overhead. Boss Grabnats squinted over the shattered wall at the Space Marines deploying at the bottom of the hill. They were unfolding into neat ranks like a well-oiled machine, apparently oblivious to the explosions and the shrapnel scything past. He hawked and spat a huge glob of green phlegm over the wall. There were loads of them, almost as many of them as there were orcs in the ruins. He ducked back down and looked over his own boys. After months of fighting, the survivors were getting bigger and tougher, their green hides thicker and gnarled, just like proper orcs. They were all excitedly slapping magazines into their shooters, cracking knuckles, sharpening fangs and blades, and bragging about how many marine boys they were going to kill. Grabnats decided that he would have to keep an eye on young Scabsnick. The extra slab of muscle he was growing, and the look of his eye, showed he had started to get ideas of being a boss. He'd need to be taught a lesson pretty soon. Time for that later, he thought, as he cursed them all roundly for being slackers and kicked them into a fighting line. No more than 2 or 3 to each gap in the wall. The last boys were just in place as Space Marine bolter fire started blasting lumps out of the wall. Grubnacks bound to his feet and started blazing away. The boys followed suit. Up and down the ruins he could hear the shout and other mobs firing. The noise alone was incredible. It pounded at his ears like a tribe of insane drummers. Great daggers of flames stabbed out from the shooters, and hot shell casings spewed everywhere. The resulting storm of fire whipped across the armored ranks, and sparks flew as shots ricocheted off the Space Marine's armor. Some of them fell, but the line kept stubbornly advancing. There was a flash and a roar a split second before the boss found himself hurled to the ground. A series of explosions followed. Rubble and dust flew from the walls with each concussion. Smoke and flames were snaking through the ruins as the boys clambered to their feet. Several were wounded, and some didn't get back up at all, even when they were kicked. Scabsnick was unconscious enough to stand up right next to a gap in the wall and was blown to bits by bolter fire. The boss felt vaguely disappointed that he wouldn't get to fight Scabsnick now that the stupid Zogger had gotten himself killed. The Space Marines must be getting close now, he thought. Time to back off to the courtyard. He led the dazed remnants of his mob in a crouching run back to the hollowed shell of a building on the other side of the courtyard. Shots snarled and roared over his head as they ran, but nobody was hit. There the big guns were being readied for another shot. Slavers cracked their whips, eliciting the shrieks of pain from the grots struggling to push the guns into position and lug more ammo forward. The boss took his boys to join up with the remnants of Ruzgob's mob. Ruzgob and his boys mocked them as they came up, but it put more heart back into the boys as they mocked back. Got chewed up and spat out. Ruzgob shouted. "Didn't see you up there, worm food," responded the boss. "You was too busy running like a runt," Ruzgob added, emphasizing by kicking his ammo runt a good 3 meters. It was an impressive kick, but the boss wasn't about to concede that. At that point, armored figures pushed through the gaps in the outer wall, and further exchanges of wit were cut short by the big guns going off again with a crash that sounded like the end of the world. The carnage was impressive. What was left of the wall was painted with bright red blood, and armored bodies were piled high around it. Ruzgob and Grubnats led their boys into the open and charged forward, howling and losing off shots as they ran. The surviving Space Marines didn't run for it or even back away, though the boss had fought Space Marines before, so he didn't really expect them to. Instead, they leveled their bolter and started firing. Boys were blown apart left, right, and center, but they kept going. The boss's boys weren't going to be outdone by Ruzgob's scum. They were about to barrel into the Space Marines when a huge chunk of the wall tumbled inward, and a massive, armored shape of a dreadnought lurched through the gap with a cannon blazing at the charging mob. Without pause, the dreadnought plowed into Ruzgob's mob like a juggernaut and almost disappeared as the orcs hurled themselves at it. The Space Marines charged to protect their dreadnought, and in an instant, the whole courtyard had dissolved into a sprawling hand-to-hand combat. This was the time all orcs lived for, the roaring, blood-pumping, heart-racing mayhem of face-to-face fighting. The boss brought his chopper down on the helm of the first Space Marine he reached, but it glanced off the shoulder plate. The Space Marine raised a bolter pistol and blew a chunk of the boss's shoulder, which stung like crazy, and made him really mad. The boss struck back with a roar, hitting at the joints in the Space Marine's armor, his elbows, knees, and neck, places where he was vulnerable. In a few quick chops, the Space Marine was face down in the mud, and the boss was blasting his slugger into the back of another one his boys were having trouble with. Ricochets flew wildly, but one shot hit something vital in the Space Marine, and he crumbled. The boss's arm was starting to stiffen up now from the wound, but his blood sang with the joy of violence, too much to take notice. He blazed away with his slugger, reveling in the solid kick of it each time it fired. When it was empty, he threw it at the dreadnought, which was busy ripping off the last of Ruskop's boys. He roared with laughter and swung his chopper to split the skull of a Space Marine who was trying to get to his feet. This was the life, the boss thought.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.